I'm really excited today to introduce our guest. Casey and I have been friends our entire life. You can tell by the chat before the meeting. She is a long-time Tupelonian or whatever you call it. I'm used to Oxonian in Oxford. I don't know what the Tupelonian or Tupelo person. She has a strong history with our club. Her grandfather, her father were both members and served as president of our club. Her aunt, Catherine Otto, played the piano for many years, was a Paul Harris Fellow. So we're thrilled to have her today. And Casey's background is fantastic. She's got over 20 years in public, private, nonprofit work in Mississippi and across the Southeast. Last January, she was selected as executive director of the American Red Cross for all of North Mississippi, which is great. Really look forward to what she has to say. She's married to Joey Grist. Joey was a guest of ours last year when he was running for Public Service Commissioner. They have two kids, JT and Jimmy. JT's my son's age. They're good friends, and Jimmy's just a really cool kid. So really happy to welcome my friend KC Grist to join us today. And Casey, I'm going to turn it over to you and mute myself so I don't interfere with what you have to say.
Thank you so much, David. I really appreciate this opportunity, and I appreciate David not telling everything he knows. It really is an honor for me to be here with y'all today. I wish that I was able to see you all in person, and I look forward to the opportunity to be able to do that. Like he said, I grew up with Rotary a big part of my life, and I have to tell some of y'all knew my dad and my granddaddy. Tom, you and Ernie may be the only ones, I'm not sure, but my Dennis is shaking his head. No. I have to tell y'all a really funny thing. So at our store, Caldwell Appliances, my granddaddy kept a big Rotary picture on the wall of his office, and it was, I guess, kind of like a composite picture. It had individual pictures of each member. And we were going through, my cousin Pat and I were going through some stuff not too long ago, and we found it, and it had X's on some people's faces. Like he had taken like a grease marker and marked an X. And we asked my Uncle Piggy what that, we were like, is that somebody that moved or what? And he said, no, when they died, he just X'd them out. And it was hanging on the wall this way, that, if you came in Caldwell's, there was this big picture, and if you had an X, you were gone. So it's kind of we have laughed a lot about don't get X'd out of the picture. But I really do, this year has been so tough for so many people, and I will honestly tell you that it's been tough on us in some ways, but it's been a real blessing. For the last 10 years, I had owned and operated a nonprofit consulting firm and had done very well and had enjoyed that. And as David mentioned, last year, my husband ran for transportation commissioner, and we both have dabbled in politics over the years. So I pretty much took the year off to run his campaign. And when he was not successful, we were sitting at the beach at Thanksgiving last year, and I was trying to figure out how I was going to get my business back on track that I had basically ignored for a year. And an ad popped up on my phone for an executive director position with the Red Cross of North Mississippi. And I had really never considered going to work for somebody else again, but it just caught my eye. I called a couple of friends and decided that it was really something I wanted to pursue. And thankfully, and like I said, in January, that worked out, and I was able to go to work for the Red Cross. Unfortunately, that was the end of January, and by around the middle of March, we were all in quarantine and we moved to our home offices. But it's been a tremendous blessing for me. Of course, like most people, I had heard of Red Cross all my life, but what I have learned over the last 10 months is amazing about the scope of the work that this organization does. So I wanted to just take a few minutes and share that. I'm not doing any type of a presentation. I know that my predecessor, John Brown, was a Rotary member, and of course the wonderful Patty Tucker, who led our organization here in North Mississippi for more than 15 years. So I know you all have probably heard a lot about Red Cross, but I wanted to take this opportunity to share with y'all some of the things that I've learned that I didn't know. And maybe you did, but I'll start by just telling you what our mission is. And it says the American Red Cross prevents and alleviates human suffering in the face of emergencies by mobilizing the power of volunteers and the generosity of donors. And I know everybody's got a mission statement, but I love the phrase alleviates human suffering. And that really goes across a lot of different areas. Our chapter here in North Mississippi is 31 counties. And it's not exactly Highway 82, but kind of. If you think about where Highway 82 runs east and west across Mississippi, everything north of there except DeSoto and Tunica counties are in our chapter. And my friend John Brown, who is now out of the Memphis chapter, picks up DeSoto and Tunica. But we have a large area, as you can imagine, with 31 counties to cover. And, you know, we do a lot of different things. One of the things that amazes me is that I think when people think about Red Cross, you generally think about the disasters. You think about the tornadoes and the hurricanes and those things. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about those a little bit later, because that's certainly a huge part of what we do. But one of the things that I really did not know before I came to work for Red Cross is about our work with home fires. And I have begun to tell people, if the worst happens, you know, if your home burns, right after the fire department gets there, the next person on the scene is most likely a Red Cross volunteer. And I had no idea of this. We have a dispatch crew. We have a team of volunteers who are on call 24/7. If your home burns at 3 o'clock in the morning, some volunteer, the fire department lets us know. And then some volunteer is going to get a phone call at 3 o'clock in the morning. Now with COVID, they don't always go. Typically they go immediately to the site. With COVID, that's changed a little bit. It may mean that your phone rings instead of a person shows up, but they're going to show up and find out if you have a safe place to stay. And if you don't, we're going to get you somewhere safe. If you have children, they're going to show up with what we call comfort kits that's got a little stuffed animal and some blankets and, you know, some things like that. Same thing for the adults. And we're going to take care of you for a few days and make sure that you've got everything you need. We're going to give you a gift card that lets you go. I always say, you know, go get the toothbrush and underwear, the stuff that you've lost. And when you get back in your home, we're going to help you get situated again and help with some deposits and things like that that you may need to be able to go back. And that's just a big piece. We respond in Mississippi, not just in North Mississippi, but in Mississippi, we respond on average to 1 fire a day. And that means somebody's going out and helping folks every day. And I really appreciate that piece of it. The Red Cross was founded with our service to our military. That was another one of the kickers last Thanksgiving when I was deciding about this job and thinking about it. I was reading Smitty Harris's book, and in it, he talked about the Red Cross and when he was a prisoner of war and how the Red Cross was able to help him stay in contact with his family. And so that was kind of another one of those little things that was dinging in my head, you know, about that. The way we support our military is very interesting to me. We can often go where others can't go. And the biggest piece that we do is communication. If a service member is deployed and something happens back home, family member passes away or becomes gravely ill or something like that, the Red Cross is often able to get that message to that service member the quickest and the most efficiently. We do a lot of work with the families back home. Sometimes they have some needs, and we have a whole division that works specifically with those folks to make sure that those family members, are able to have what they need. Most recently, well, we always work with the veterans' homes. But one of the things that we reenacted during this COVID time is back during the 1918 pandemic, Red Cross distributed masks to people. And so we sort of re-upped that, and we reached out to volunteer groups and asked them to help us provide masks, especially early on when you couldn't get PPE and that kind of thing. Without masks, family members couldn't go into the veterans' homes and visit their loved ones, and our volunteers and even the staff in some cases couldn't go into the veterans' homes and the veterans' hospitals to help them. So we put the call out, and y'all, in Mississippi alone, we delivered 30,000 masks to our military bases and to the veterans' homes. I can't remember exactly how many went to the veterans' home in Oxford, but we were able to do more masks than any place else in the country. And I think that speaks, well, that's probably not surprising to any of us that Mississippians would respond in that way, but it's amazing to me the amount of effort. That reminds me to speak briefly about our volunteer workforce. In the United States of America, the Red Cross employs about 18,000 people. Those are paid employees, and but we have 307,000 volunteers. 95% of our workforce is a volunteer workforce. And another thing that I didn't know that there were people in this world, in Tupelo, Mississippi, who work for the Red Cross and never get a dime. Not only are those people that I talked about that are on call 24/7 and may get that call, there are people who, when the disasters happen, when the hurricanes happen, when the tornadoes happen, there are people from all over this country that just pack up and go. That's what they do. That is their job. They just don't get paid to do it. There's a fella in my office that I had been on the job for probably a month before I knew he wasn't a paid employee. Comes in, he handles all of our fleet, all of our cars, all of the maintenance on our buildings, all of our operations, purchasing, all of this kind of stuff. And he's 100% a volunteer. But he is, when our offices are open, which they're not now, but when they're open, he's there 8 to 5 every day. And he's completely a volunteer. I want to make sure I don't miss anything. Another area that the Red Cross, and a lot of us know about this, is our training services. The CPR classes, the water classes, swimming lessons, life-saving classes, all of those kinds of things are all part of what Red Cross does as well. An area that I, again, was also not really aware of, but kind of fits into that training module piece, is that we do a lot of what we call preparedness training. And that can be anything from, sort of encouraging people to put a disaster kit together, so that if something happens, you're able to survive. If you're in a tornado and your house gets blown away and you're in your shelter and you don't have power and you don't have lights and you don't have water and you don't have, what do you have with you? But a couple of the things that we do in schools with children. And Coach McCoy, I don't know if they were doing this when you were still at school. I don't remember ever seeing this, but there's a program that we do called the Pillowcase Project, and it's for elementary students primarily, but we use a lot of high school students and train them to come in and do these projects. But it's helping children to be prepared if a fire were to happen at their house, and they teach them all kind of things to put in a pillowcase. and keep the pillowcase right by your bed so that if a fire were to happen in the middle of the night, you can grab that pillowcase and run to your spot. We have just been able to develop that program into a virtual training program that we're going to be able to do in our schools very soon virtually. And I'm excited about that because that's one of those areas that we've not really been able to do lately. I don't want to just talk and talk and talk. I think I have hit the major points. I do want to say a couple of things about how COVID has impacted the work that we do. You know, clearly disasters don't stop because we have a global pandemic. In fact, it kind of seems this year like they've ramped it up a little bit. Between the fires out west and certainly all of our storms in the Gulf, and we've had a few tornadoes and some wind damage, a little bit of flooding even up our way, we've had to adapt. And, you know, the most significant thing that has changed and that has impacted our budget is the fact that we no longer can really do mass shelters. We can't, you know, go down to the Bank Core South Arena and set up 300 cots for people to come and stay. And what we've tried to do when we haven't had too many people to take care of is we've had to put people in hotels. And as you can imagine, that is significantly more expensive than it is to throw 200 cots on the floor of the arena. I was on a call a month or so ago, and the fellow on the call said, tonight, the Red Cross nationwide has 30,000 people in hotel rooms. I mean, think about that and what that costs. And, you know, and even from a feeding perspective, you know, when we go out to feed folks, I know when we had some folks in hotels on the coast, again, you can't, you know, you don't have that big line in the high school gym where somebody has prepared the food. We have to take boxed meals, you know, that have been catered to folks. And so that's been a little bit of an adaptation. In our most recent storms with Hurricane Laura and Hurricane Sally, and then even with Zeta, we were able to sort of change and do some smaller mass shelters. We had so many people on the coast that, you know, that needed to be taken care of, that instead of those huge ones, we were able to use some church gyms and, you know, where you could put maybe 15, 20 people and spread them out and do that kind of thing. But I did want you to know that, you know, we haven't stopped responding. We haven't stopped any of the missions that we've been doing. As far as COVID goes, we've just had to figure out another way to do it. I wanted to tell you just really quickly where our funding comes from and how it's spent. We do receive some funding from the federal government. We are fortunate that we receive some money from various local governments. Our city of Tupelo contributes to our North Mississippi chapter. Lots of cities and counties do. 90% of every dollar that is donated to the Red Cross is spent on our humanitarian services. And I'm real proud of that. Like I said, I've worked in the nonprofit world for over 20 years. And they always tell you that about 75 to 80% is excellent. If you run across a nonprofit that is spending 75 to 80%, and we're spending between 90 and 95% on our mission, and I'm real proud of that. I think that's very significant. I will be glad to take some questions, but I wanted to close with, how can you help? And I would be remiss if I didn't start that off with, you can make a donation. It's the end of the year, and we would be more than happy to accept any financial contribution. The simplest thing you can do is go to redcross.org and click on the donate button. David is on our board, and I'm sure would be most happy to accept your contribution in person. If you would like to give something to him, he would be happy to turn that over to us. But I will tell y'all that as much as money is needed, we also need volunteers. And when I say that, it doesn't mean, this is another one of those things I didn't know. We use volunteers in just about every profession. If you happen to be a minister or a counselor, we have a spot for you. You know, we have people who have gone through disasters and they need folks to talk to. It's traumatic. If you have some time and would like to do some administrative work, we have a spot for you. If you enjoy doing, certainly if you enjoy doing the disaster work, you know, we would love to get you trained and have you on board to help us respond where we need you. But there are, I just got a volunteer the other day. A lot of y'all know Leisha Faulkner, who is over our city museum now. Leisha has signed on to be a communications volunteer. My goodness, someone with her experience for me to have right here in my chapter to help with our media relations is huge. So I would like for you all to consider how you might be available and how you might like to assist with the Red Cross. And I'm happy to talk to you one-on-one about that and answer any questions. One of the easiest things that you can do is, if you're on social media, if you would follow our page, if you would go to Red Cross of Mississippi, Red Cross of North Mississippi, and when you see the things we post, if you would share those things, just helping to get the word out about a lot of the things we do is tremendously helpful. And finally, many of you have probably attended our Evening of Jazz, which is our major fundraising event each year. We obviously weren't able to have it in 2020, and we don't expect to have it in 21 either. We're currently making a decision on what kind of event, what we're going to be able to do for a fundraising event in 21. So I just encourage you to stay tuned, and I will keep you posted on that, as will David. I know I've talked a lot and I've said a lot of stuff. I hope I haven't bored you too much. But if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer any if there's time, David.
We're in good shape on time. If y'all will just unmute yourself, go ahead and ask your questions, or you can do it in the group chat and I'll ask it for you. While they're thinking of their questions, Casey, I'm going to go ahead and ask, you know, we hear about all the wildfires out west and the increased activity in hurricanes. Talk about how the demand for services through the Red Cross is at an all-time high because of all these natural disasters that are occurring both locally and nationally. Talk about how that's impacted the Red Cross and other organizations who provide service.
Sure. Well, the biggest thing is manpower. You know, like I said, you normally don't have all of this stuff hitting all at one time. And so, for example, when we got down to, I don't remember which of the hurricanes hit first. I think it was Laura. But when Hurricane Laura hit, we had so many of our volunteers were already out west. They had already gone out west to help out there. And so being able to pull locally enough people to help was a real challenge. We ended up, you know, bringing in a lot of other people. And that's one of the things that has really opened my eyes about the need for plenty of local volunteers. For example, one of the things I learned was when our tornado hit, 5 years ago here in Tupelo. Of course, when it hits in your backyard and you're impacted, you know, you're trying to keep your head above water. So they're typically bringing in people from outside, but we didn't have enough volunteers in North Mississippi. So when we bring in volunteers from out of state, other places, we pay for that. You know, we don't pay the volunteers, but we put them in a hotel room and they drive a Red Cross car and we feed them while they're here. And we, you know, so that's another one of those eye openers about having backup upon backup upon backup of a volunteer workforce to help out.
We've got a couple of online questions I'll ask real quick. Tom Booth said, what's the biggest challenge during COVID? He said it's got to be, you know, doubling.
Yeah.
Even more difficult, right?
Yeah, and I mean, we touched on it a little bit, but the biggest challenge is, of course, the bulk of our volunteer workforce are retirees. Well, who's most impacted? Who's at most risk with COVID? Folks in that retirement age. And so that has been the biggest challenge, I would say, because we haven't stopped providing our services, but accessing a workforce that is able to go out and figure out how to do these kinds of things. And one of the nice things about an organization that is as large as the Red Cross and has been around as long, we figure it out pretty quickly. And so, now we have kind of systems in place, and we know exactly, how to go about it. And the Red Cross takes very seriously our role as a humanitarian organization, and particularly as one who deals with disasters and that kind of thing. And I can tell you from my personal experience, our COVID protocol is more stringent than the CDC. I am quarantined not only for the 14 days from the time that I was diagnosed, but 14 more days. And so, for example, I was going to go up to my office at the Red Cross office, even though our offices are closed. I've been going once a week or so and checking the mail and that kind of thing. And I called my boss and said, "Can I go up there to even do this Zoom call?" And he said, "We're not taking any chances." So it's just, it's the same kinds of things that have impacted everybody else.
One more online, and then we'll open it up for everybody else. Jeff asked about Red Cross blood donations in North Mississippi.
Well, Jeff, we don't do them in North Mississippi. We're one of the rare chapters across the country that we do not do blood collection in North Mississippi. And I don't really know why. I don't know if that's because, we have some organizations here that do it, and so they just didn't feel like that ours was needed. So I don't know, because of that, I don't really know a whole lot about why we don't. But I will speak to one of the big things in the areas where we do collect blood is that we have been one of the organizations that does collect the convalescent plasma, and that we do the antibody testing, where we're able to tell if somebody has already had it, and then to be able to collect that plasma to be able to be used in some of the treatments.
All right, other questions?
David, Randy McCoy here. Casey, how many volunteers do you have throughout the 31 counties, or approximately, and what's your operating budget?
Well, I will tell you that I don't know the operating budget. That would be something good for me to know, and I can look that up and get back to you. I apologize, I don't know. But in North Mississippi, I think we have around 250 volunteers, and that's across the board, that do all sorts of things. I'd like to see us double that. I think if you think about 31 counties, 250 volunteers is not that much. And, I think we need 2 to 3 times that to be able to do everything, whether it's, you've got retired educators who do a great job at being able to be trained on some of these programs where we go into the schools. You've got certainly board members. We have a volunteer slot that we call a community volunteer leader. And my goal is to get one in every county, because it's basically me in every county. So it would be, over in Greenville, if I can't make it to the Rotary Club over there when we're not doing things virtually, there's someone local, that can do that. I didn't mention this, but we do have several satellite offices. We do have an office in Greenville. We have one in Columbus. And then we have a small one in Sardis. And so we do have some, some different spots. But one of the things that came up right after I took this job was that there was a couple of tornadoes over in the Delta, and we needed to get water to the Delta. And it was strange to me that I didn't have any volunteers in a couple of places. I can't remember now, but somewhere, but we had to have a volunteer from Columbus drive water to Clarksdale. And that just didn't make any sense to me, you know, that the way we had to do things. And so that has been a goal of mine and of our board, to begin to really concentrate on getting volunteers all across our 31 counties. You know, we have a lot kind of concentrated right here around Tupelo and not so many around the other areas.
Any more live questions?
I think I saw one more in the chat, David.
Yes, you did. BJ Campbell asked, what does training look like and mean for volunteers? Great question.
Sure. Well, obviously we train our trainers. And what it looks like is if you wanted to be trained in a particular area, for example, if you wanted to be trained in how to do some of these preparedness, you know, projects, whether it's the pillowcase like I talked about, or we have a great Red Cross Ready, and you know, we do some online, it's mostly online training to get you ready. And then there is some live, when it's things like CPR or some of those kind of things, there are, you know, when we're able to get back together, there are live elements of that. And then we would just, when we have a need, if a, you know, organization calls us and says, hey, we, you know, my folks need to be recertified in CPR, then we, you know, we would call on our trained volunteers.
Okay, great. Anything else for KC before we wrap up? All right. Well, thank you so much, KC. Great presentation. Great having you as a guest.